Right everyone, it is Finn here and welcome to my Champions League Round 4 prediction video, also known as the beginning of the return fixtures. As we know, ladies and gentlemen, at this point of the Champions League season, it's essentially like Game of Thrones. You either get your revenge or you get a knife pushed further and further into your back. And of course, in today's video, we're going to be talking about every game coming your way in Champions League Match Week 4 and whether the teams will get their revenge or, as I said, get stabbed further and further. And of course, talking about our first game being Copenhagen versus Manchester City, I do feel like, with all respect in Copenhagen's direction, it is going to be one of those teams that won't get their revenge.
How dare you!
It was only a week ago where Manchester City absolutely thrashed the Danish teams 5-0, and unless some sort of magic in the universe happened that I wasn't aware of, I don't really see anything changing in this scenario, and I do see Manchester City getting, once again, throughout this season, it's going to be a very common story, another very dominant win. I am only going to put forward a 4-0 win. I feel like Man City aren't going to play their best players. I feel like they might experiment since they've started off so well, and at the end of the day, who knows, maybe Copenhagen can pull off a surprise. As we know, Manchester City have kind of fallen off a tiny bit. I mean, it took a full hour for Erling Haaland to score a goal in his previous game.
Great success.
Jokes aside, although Erling Haaland only scored one in his previous game, he has been an absolute monster all season. I'm sure he'll break so many records, and versus a team like Copenhagen, I can't really see Manchester City have too many problems. Now moving on to our next game, we've got Haifa versus Juventus. Now Juventus, a team with, where do I start? Would me calling it problems, would that be big enough? Looking at Juventus, they've only won 2 Serie A games so far. They've just lost 2-0 to AC Milan. They've only won 1 game in the Champions League. Things are not going well at the old lady at the moment. I mean, for an old lady, I think it's time to almost put them down, I'm sorry to say. Looking at Juventus though, I think the one upside for them versus Haifa is the fact that the only win in the Champions League was versus them. Looking at Haifa, obviously 0 wins in the Champions League. Looking at the quality in this Juventus team, it would be shameful not for them to get a win. And I expect at least a 1-0 result. I mean, at this point, if they don't make it, they might already be out of the Champions League. Now, at least, moving on from that game, we've got a really exciting fixture with AC Milan versus Chelsea. Now, I would like to apologize to every Chelsea fan out there. Obviously, in my previous match week prediction video, I thought that AC Milan would absolutely thrash this team, but obviously Chelsea did prove me wrong there. Graham Potter has had a terrific start to his Chelsea campaign. I mean, at the end of the day, as we know, Graham Potter is the king of glow-ups, so I'm not sure why we're too surprised there, but this Chelsea team is looking like a whole new team under Graham Potter. Saying that, as I said, AC Milan also looking really, really good in Serie A, so this could be, let's call it a match to remember. This could be such a vital match for both teams this season into whether they progress to the next stage. I do feel like, though, looking at that 3-0 win for Chelsea the last time these two teams met a week ago, I feel like that has given me a good idea of who's going to take the points here, and I do think Chelsea will take this one 2-1. I feel like it will be a lot closer this time around now that both teams have a good understanding of each other, and I will probably go down as the game to watch of the match week. Now moving on to our next game, we've got Borussia Dortmund versus Sevilla. Once again, not a game I have to think too much about. I do think Borussia Dortmund should take this one easily. Sevilla, when it comes to La Liga and Champions League, have not shown up in any single regard.
I'm just happy to be here.
Looking at Borussia Dortmund though, they're very modest in attack, or should I say modesta in attack, because their striker has really filled out the boots of what would have been Sebastian Haller. And looking at this team as a whole, they just are a lot better than Sevilla, and I expect nothing more or nothing less than a dominant win. Now moving on to our next game, once again, very interesting fixture as it is Celtic versus RB Leipzig. Now if you asked me about 2-3 weeks ago, I would have said that this should be a very, very close game, but over the last few weeks, RB Leipzig have slowly been crawling to get some more points. I mean, it's a bit like Olivier Giroud. It's not the fastest in the world, but eventually it will get there.
That was uncalled for, Judith.
And I feel like that's very symbolic of RB Leipzig's form at the moment. They're slowly getting more and more points. They're slowly having better and better results. And versus a team like Celtic, although absolutely brilliant team, in terms of a European level, I do think RB Leipzig are slightly better. Now moving on, we've got another very, very interesting fixture with Zagreb versus Salzburg. Now once again, as I've said a few times before in these prediction videos, I view these two teams as very, very similar. They both have the ability to take points from top teams. They've got brilliant attacks. Defensively, they can both be very, very solid. So in terms of progressing to the next stage of the competition, playing against each other is very, very important. Now, although Salzburg did beat Zagreb in the last meeting between these two teams, it was a penalty. And I would almost argue that at some points in the game, Zagreb was the better team. Once again, look at these two teams. It will be a highly, highly competitive game. But for some reason, it's just, once again, I always say it in these videos, just a gut feeling. I do think Zagreb will take this one 1-0, and they're going to reverse it from the previous time around. Now heading on to our next game, we've got PSG versus Benfica. Now as we know, both of these two teams unbeaten in all competitions so far this season, and last time they played against each other last week, it was a draw. And I would argue that Benfica was the better team in that fixture. In terms of attacking, they really found the defensive gaps in PSG's defense. Saying that, looking at PSG, when you've got a player like Lionel Messi, even if you don't have gaps to be found, he makes sure to find those gaps. He'll get a spade and dig a gap if he has to. Looking at PSG, if it wasn't for the magic of Lionel Messi, I don't know where they would have gone in that game. But once again, I know it might sound a bit crazy saying that Benfica was better last time around, but I do think PSG will take this one. Once again, you just look at the quality in their team. It is an absolute cheat code, and if they don't fix things for this time around, I would be seriously worried. Now moving on, we've got Shakhtar versus Real Madrid. Now let's just see if I can quickly reload this graphic so that it looks slightly more appealing to the eyes. Oh, I don't know if that does look more appealing. It kind of looks like Hull City versus Real Madrid.
Naughty, you teasing me?
But looking at Shakhtar, it has always been a team that's been very close to Real Madrid. It's always been a very tight contest. If you look at the history between these two clubs, it was a 2-1 win in Real Madrid's favor. Same goes the last time around. Looking at Shakhtar, they've never been bad versus Real Madrid. But looking at them last time around, I do think Real Madrid, once again, they were the dominant team, although maybe the score results didn't quite flatter them in that regard. Real Madrid, top quality team. You really can't race against them. And although I do like Shakhtar's chances here and there, they can pull off surprises. This Real Madrid team's just way too strong, and it should be at least a 3-0 win. In terms of all of their attacking ability, Real Madrid is so good at the moment. Heading on to our next game, we've got Atletico Madrid versus Club Brugge. Now, it only took Atletico Madrid to finally get Antonio Griezmann. Who? Or Antoine Griezmann and play him for a full 90 minutes for them to realize that maybe he isn't that good anymore. I mean, finally being able to play him for 90 minutes, and I mean, he misses a penalty. Maybe this was some sort of elaborate scam by Barcelona. Maybe they said, you know what, play well enough for Atletico Madrid so that they end up still eventually buying you, and they just play bad for them. I'm sure we'll sort out some bonuses for you. At the end of the day, once again, jokes aside, Atletico Madrid, a top quality team, but looking at them versus Club Brugge, I'm not sure it's going to be an easy task for them. Club Brugge have had a phenomenal start to this Champions League campaign, the first ever club from Belgium to get the first 9 out of 9 points in the Champions League. They've had a brilliant start, considering how difficult their group is for them. It is not going to be an easy game for them this time around. I do think Atletico Madrid would have learned from their previous game, but I do think that they'll still get points, and it could potentially be a 1-1 draw. Now moving on, we've got Napoli versus Ajax. Now looking at Ajax, unfortunately, they have lost Dusan Tadic to a red card, and he'll not be playing in a game like this. I mean, kudos to Ajax, quite literally kudos to Ajax. They've still got brilliant players in those positions, but a 6-1 loss to Napoli, you just can't defend something like that. I mean, kind of like how Ajax couldn't defend versus Napoli. And looking at Napoli, in terms of their form across all competitions lately, I can only see them winning this one. It will be a smaller win in my opinion, but it's at least going to be a 3-1 win. Now heading on to our next game, once again another gigantic game to talk about. Barcelona versus Inter. Now although yes, Inter did win the previous meeting between Barcelona 1-0, I would almost argue at many points of the game that Barcelona had a brilliant performance. Ousmane Dembele was absolutely terrific, and a lot of referee decisions kind of went against Barcelona's flow of play. I don't think Barcelona were bad in that game, and versus Inter, I do think they'll take the points this time around, and I do think it will just be an Uno reverse with a 1-0 win. As I said, not a bad performance versus them, and if Inter kind of play in a similar manner as they did last time around, I do feel like it'll come and bite them in the back. Now heading on to our next game, Bayern Leverkusen versus Porto. Now looking at Bayern Leverkusen, with the amount of absolute class and talent in their team, it makes me absolutely Patrick Schick to my stomach, the performances they've had.
Nice.
They've been very underwhelming this season across all competitions, and looking at them versus Porto, they could really struggle here. Porto have an absolutely brilliant team, from Pepe at the back to Taremi up front and so many others. Once again, I really do like this Porto team, and versus Bayer Leverkusen, I really do back them to get all 3 points here. Now, heading on to our next game, we've got Rangers versus Liverpool. Now, although Liverpool haven't been brilliant this season, they've been a bit out of their range. Talking about range, looking at Rangers versus Liverpool, if there's one team that I do back Liverpool to get points against here, it is Rangers. Obviously, in their previous meeting, it was a 2-0 win in Liverpool's favour, and although they haven't been brilliant in the Premier League, they've been okay in the Champions League, bar their opening game. I do like Rangers, but after selling many of their best players over the recent transfer window, I do think Liverpool are better off. Once again, the confidence would be huge for Liverpool in a game like this, and I do think it'll be very similar to the last one with a 2-0 win. Now heading on, we've got Sporting CP versus Marseille. And looking at Marseille, Alexis Sanchez has been an absolute beast up front for them lately. A huge reason to why they got points in their previous Champions League game, why they've been so good in the French league. I mean, his performances for Marseille have been so good. I would say they're his best performances since he played the piano for Manchester United. That man has found some serious form, and versus Sporting, it could prove very, very important. It was a 4-1 win versus Sporting last week when they played against each other, and I do feel like things this time around could be very, very similar with a 3-0 win. Looking at Sporting, they haven't been great this season in the Champions League, they've been quite good, but just overall in the domestic season, they definitely need to pick up, and versus a very informed Marseille team, they could struggle. Now, heading into our final game, second final game, we've got Tottenham Hotspurs versus Frankfurt. Once again, looking at Tottenham Hotspurs, it's just so Spursy of them to lose the points that they have been. Looking at them in that 0-0 draw versus Frankfurt, Harry Kane was the most wasteful I've ever seen him throughout his career. He was horrible and could be a real problem if he plays like that in the future for England come the World Cup. But looking at Tottenham Hotspurs, Antonio Conte is not a man who likes losing.
Yeah, I prefer to kill him.
And I feel like he is going to want to change things, saying that he doesn't have a good European record. I think I heard that Antonio Conte has only won like 30% of all games he's played in the Champions League, which isn't great, but if there's one team I do back a win against, it will be Frankfurt, because at the end of the day, Tottenham Hotspurs still were the better team. They just weren't clinical enough, and I feel like this time around it could be a 2-0 win, and I do feel like looking at players like Heung-min Son, Richarlison, Harry Kane, Kulusevski, they do have to pick up in a game like this. And ladies and gentlemen, that takes us to our final game of Champions League Round 4. Once again, don't forget, if you guys have enjoyed these videos, do subscribe down below as it helps the channel out massively. But looking at Plzen versus Bayern Munich, I mean, they've literally got Plz there. They're literally begging in their name not to face Bayern Munich. As we know, Bayern Munich, although they haven't been good in the Bundesliga, they've really let things slip and are in real, trouble of losing the Bundesliga this season.
That's impossible.
Versus a team like Plzen, who literally last week they beat 5-0. Once again, should be no problems here whatsoever, and I do think Bayern Munich will get at least a 4-0 win. But ladies and gentlemen, that is pretty much it for my Champions League Round 4 prediction video. Once again, as I said, I hope that you guys have enjoyed it. Don't forget your predictions down below. Always like seeing your predictions in the comment section, whether they align with mine, whether they're more accurate than mine, all of those things. But of course, don't forget to like, subscribe, all of the good things. Until next week, this has been Finn, FYNN. Cheers.